A new component is created by right-clicking in the model browser and selecting Create Component. The name is set to Geometry and the color is set to yellow. The material and property are left unassigned and Create is selected to create the component Geometry. Next, lines are created using the Lines panel by selecting Geometry, Create, Lines, Standard Nodes. Two nodes are selected in the graphics area and then Create is clicked to create a line. Notice that the line is yellow. This is the same color assigned to the component Geometry. This is because the line is organized into the current component, which is Geometry. Next, inside the model browser, right-click on the component Rigid and select Make Current to make Rigid the current component. Then two nodes are selected in the graphics area and Create is clicked to create another line. Notice that the line is red. This is the same color assigned to the component Rigid as that is the current component. Next, all the model surfaces will be moved into the component Geometry using the Organize panel. To enter the Organize panel, click Geometry, Organize Surfaces. Using the Extended Entity Selector, All is selected to select all the surfaces in the model. Then Destination Component is set to Geometry and Move is clicked. Next, the shell elements in the model will be moved into the component Center. First, the Entity Selector is set to Elements, and then ByCollector is used to select the elements using the components. The components Mid1, Mid2, and End are selected. Then, Destination Component is set to Center, and Move is clicked. Next, the component Center is renamed to Shells using the right-click menu in the model browser. The F2 key is pressed to jump to the Delete panel. After switching the selector to Comps, Preview Empty is clicked to find all the component collectors that are empty. The status bar displays the message, 3 entities are empty. Then the Entity Selector Comps is selected again to see a list of the identified empty components. Delete Entity is clicked to delete the 3 selected components. The Entity Selector is set to Lines, and then all lines in the model are deleted. Next, the component collectors will be reordered using the Reorder panel. The Reorder panel is entered by selecting Collectors, Reorder, Components. The Comp selector is clicked, and then Name, ID is selected to show both the name and ID of the component collectors. The component Geometry is then selected. The option Move To is set to Front. This means that the Geometry component will be reordered and listed at the top of the list. Clicking on Comps, the list of component collectors is shown. Notice how the component Geometry is at the top of the list. However, it still has the same ID. Now the component collectors will be renumbered using the Renumber panel. To access the Renumber panel, Collectors, Renumber, Components is clicked. All component collectors are selected and Start With is set to 1. Increment By is set to 1 and Offset is set to 0. After clicking on the Comp selector, you can see the components were renumbered based on their position in the list. An assembly is created by selecting Collectors, Create, Assemblies. The name of the assembly is set to Elements and Create is clicked. Using the model browser, the components Rigids and Shells are selected and then dragged and dropped into the Elements Assembly folder. Within the model browser, a load collector is created by selecting Create Load Collectors through the right-click menu. The name is set to Constraints and the color is set to red. Create is then clicked to create the load collector. The existing load collector, Loads, contains several forces and one constraint. Next, the Organize panel will be used to move the one constraint into the load collector, Constraints. Collectors, Organize, Load Collectors is clicked to enter the Organize panel. The Collector subpanel is selected and the Entity Selector is set to Loads. To select the loads, the ByConfig option is used from the Extended Entity Selection. Config Equals is then checked and Constraints is selected. The toggle next to Displayed is then set to All and Select Entities is clicked. Move is clicked to move the selected constraints into the load collector constraints. Create Component from the right-click menu is clicked in the model browser to create a new component collector. The name of the component is set to Component 1 and the color is set to pink. Create is then clicked to create the component. The component's geometry and Component 1 are selected and placed into the assembly asem_mid. The assembly asem_mid is renamed to asem_geom, and then Component 1 is deleted using the right-click menu in the model browser. The component shells is made the current component by right-clicking on it in the model browser and selecting Make Current.